All right, we're on.
We're on. We're live.
Yeah, so
Everyone.
welcome to another Twitch stream.
Another
Obviously,
Twitch stream. So have
yeah,
you been doing these somewhat regularly or
yeah. I just
recently?
started last week, so
Mm.
and just kind of doing like a design process stream where we're just
Yep.
doing like a project and kind of taking that all the way through from
Yep.
start to completion. So that's kind of cool. It's pretty new, just like doing that, starting off slowly and just going through that process and seeing how that all goes.
Yep.
But yeah, I thought today we'd bring in Tim and talk about some kind of working from home, motivational strategies, time management, all of that kind of stuff. That given the current situation, everybody is kind of in all of a sudden.
Yeah, yeah. It's a hot topic.
Yeah, so yeah, it's we're going to kind of go over that and stuff. So yeah, I guess if you've got any questions and stuff,
Mm.
please ask us questions and we can talk about stuff and yeah, just kind of like go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, did you well, I guess because I mean, I've been working at home for a long time, right? And I don't know whether have you ever worked from home for a long period of time?
Yeah, yep.
So when was that? When did you
Probably for 10 years.
All right. Because yeah, that was when you started, you were freelancing a lot more.
Yeah, so when I first started, when I was doing kids books, that was I just started. That was all
Right.
just at home freelancing,
Yep.
and then it wasn't until 2008 when I started working in games. That's when I went and got a job at a studio,
Right.
and then even after that, then I freelanced for ages after that as well. Like I kind of worked for a few different studios. Then I'd go and work in a house for a few months. You know, like go to Sydney, go to Melbourne, go wherever.
Yeah.
Then I'd be back home for a year, and then so
Yep.
always kind of like hopped around. But then, and it's not really until sort of CDW Studios where since 2012, that's when I kind of just started working at CDW Studios, I guess.
Yeah. Like forever. Like,
Yeah, so now that's been like 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My
and
God.
now I'm just like, oh my god, I can't imagine working at home anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's just part of it's what you get used to, right? As well.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, totally. I mean, it's well, I mean, it's really that. I guess the thing that I always sort of worry about is that issue of sort of some people feel that they are better suited to one thing than another, right? And I feel like that is a question. Is like, are you someone who is going to like working from home all the time? Which is probably not really the question we're talking about now, right? We're sort of talking about, like people are sort of stuck at home for a shorter period of time. Like, what can you sort of do? But I mean, it's probably worthwhile talking about some of the larger things because they're a bit separate. But one is that, yeah, probably some people enjoy the idea of working from home more than others, right? And the other question is like, well, regardless of that, how can you kind of improve your ability to do it? Because yeah, to me, I'm just so used to working from home that the idea of not working, as you know, the idea of like working at an office, that there's so many like negatives to that now that I see. That yeah, it's like really tricky. Yeah, so I mean, I come at it from that angle. I think I'm suited to working from home. I think I've always aspired to work from home because most of the artists who I wanted to be like were kind of it was doing that sort of comic book artist thing or like the freelance artist thing, like you're saying, right? Like the people I sort of grew up admiring all worked either from home or from like little studios, right? Where there's like 3 people sharing a studio or something like that. So to me, it's kind of, that's just what you do. Yeah. So, I mean, it's probably important for you to sort of contextualize it. Cause to me, it's very normal. And, I've sort of invested a lot of energy and time in figuring out how to make it work for me to the point where now, like I've overcome most of the difficulties and, the positives are so many, right? Once you get over those difficulties, that it's kind of it just seems like silly to go and work somewhere for me. Just things like you just can play music really loud that you want you know, you can just do anything you want, really, as long as you finish your work. You know, you can just be like, bye, I'm going for a walk now because I want to. You know, if you're not doing a giant you know, scheduled thing, the advantages to organizing your schedule are pretty significant. But I think the problem is for people now is there is a big hurdle, right? That's the main thing that I would say is like there's a big hurdle to figuring out how you work at home. Because I don't think there's any such thing as sort of like here's like 5 tips, right? Like here are the things that work for everyone. I think a lot of it is about understanding how you work and what sort of happens when you get sort of stuck up in a room, and what happens, you know, what sort of tendencies do you have? And I think, figuring that out is pretty important. So I view it as much more of a personal thing, and that's sort of one side of it. But the other side is there's a bunch of tips I can sort of give to help people through that sort of thing, and maybe some things you haven't sort of thought about. The other thing is I go over some of these things in the productivity sessions that we teach at CDW, and it probably is good for people to either revisit that, or a lot of the first years haven't heard that yet. So I thought that might be good to go over just some of those super basic things, right? But so when you worked from home, like, you know, what kind of things did you do? Because you were saying an interesting thing the other day, where you were saying that you worked from home for like 10 years or whatever when you first started and you became a freelancer, and you did pretty well at that. You figured it out, I assume.
Yep.
Right. You got to a point where you were comfortable doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But then you went and worked in a studio, and you felt like you were way more productive in the studio environment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I found that kind of at the start was definitely like just I would work, and I think I was working a lot, and then I'd find I was up till 3 a.m. every morning trying to get work done.
Yes.
You know, for my client stuff. And then when I started to work in a studio, when you've got somebody kind of over your back, like we used to sit in an area where there was 10 artists kind of all in that area, and you'd be working and you couldn't have Facebook and YouTube playing or watching movies or whatever it is that I would do when I was at home, thinking that I was being productive while I was working, watching a movie. And then when I was in that environment, just working like 9 to 5, I just found it like it was literally a eureka moment where I was like, oh my God, I'm getting so much work done during this period of 9 to 5 that I could then go home and do other art that I kind of wanted to do. And when I was freelancing, I was just finding I had, you know, I was just always chasing my tail trying to get stuff done. But I think it was just because I was not being as productive as I thought. Right. Yeah. I think now if I went home and freelanced, I would literally just be like, okay, everybody leave me alone from 9 to 5 p.m. I'm doing work. That's it. And I would just do work. But it's sometimes it's hard when you don't have that, you know, the boss cracking the whip.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like maybe that's like, have you over the years developed strategies, Tim, that you find that helps like motivate you to get into that workspace and finding, I guess that's what for the, you know, some tips now for these guys as to like what strategies you kind of put in place to actually be kind of productive during the hours that you want to work.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. One is like it's not as if I feel like now I'm able to be fairly effective with my time, and I'm also able to be quite flexible with my time. And I've sort of tried to develop the ability to sort of say, today I'm gonna, like, I sort of just plan my day, and I know that there's going to be this sort of, you know, that kind of classic 6 to 8 hours of work, right, in a day. And when you're working from home, or when you're actually working, right, I mean like actual work, right, like actual, you're doing the thing, right, not sort of preparing to do the thing, thinking about it, right. But there's that sort of core time when I'm working, and I've gotten pretty good at being able to kind of say that can be whenever, right, doesn't really matter. It's to do with the, you know, so if I'm having a lunch with someone, right, it means like I'm going to do a bit before and then I do a bit after, right? Or I might do a bit in the morning and then I have a giant sort of break in the middle, and then I work from like 10 till 3 in the morning, you know, like whatever needs doing. And sometimes the reasons for that are various, right? But But yeah, that I think that the first thing is to make a distinction between the feeling of being busy and productive and actually being productive, right? Like actually outputting some product or thing,
Yep.
versus the feeling of it. And that they're very different.
Because sometimes it feels like you're being productive when you're scrolling on Facebook, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the key to it is very simple, is that exactly what you're saying. And I think this is why, like, and this is interesting because I've obviously started doing this before there was YouTube, right? I mean, you were probably the same. When you did it, you weren't watching YouTube. You were watching, like, I mean, I think YouTube, when did YouTube start? Like 2008?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it wasn't YouTube.
Yeah, it was like before.
It was probably like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
On DVD.
Yeah, on DVD. Yeah, totally. And
next to my record player.
Yeah, but and before that it was VHS, and before that it was, so artists have a long history of that sort of thing. And what works for you, like, everyone has to figure it out. The question is, are you able to get what you need to do done, right? And I think depending on how many asks there are of you, that might be really easy. And some people seem to like that. I mean, I heard lots of comic book artists say that, they just have the TV on all day. And I remember this is in this was in 2000, like 1999. And I was reading, written interviews in books of people saying, like, because I was interested, like, how do people do this? What is their day like? And yeah, people would be saying, yeah, I watch TV all day. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I know that people do that, and people have been doing that for a long time, having these kind of distraction things. And I think there's various reasons for that. But I think now, obviously, that is just completely off the rails with the degree to which you can be distracted. And the thing is that people are completely unaware that there is a difference between feeling like you're busy and actually being productive and busy. And it's so easy to be in a social media sort of world where you're like scrolling Facebook and you're thinking about one thing, and then you've got a podcast playing in another thing, and then you're trying to do a bit of work. And because of the load that puts on your mind, you feel like, oh, all this stuff is happening, and I'm really like, I'm here and I'm here and I'm here and I'm here. And you sort of imagine like you're this like high-powered lawyer, attorney, and you've got all these people asking these things, and really you're just fucking sitting there doing nothing. Sorry, let me know if we can swear. You're just freaking sitting there doing nothing.
We're G-rated. We're G-rated, Tim.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're sitting there doing absolutely nothing, and nothing is happening. If you look at the output, nothing is occurring, right? Or you're talking about, it's often the output can be so small that you're talking about like 2 hours of actual output in 6 hours or 7 hours, right? That's actually what's happening. But it can feel as if you're really, gunning. And that's because your brain is full of stuff and you're being pulled in many different directions. And it feels really exciting, and your adrenaline is up, right? And you're discovering new things. And the real metric to use is like, how much work are you doing, right, over a given period of time? And that's the real thing to think about. And I mean, the answer to this is really simple. It's just like, stop doing that stuff. Stop distracting yourself, because it's physically, scientifically, factually impossible for you to actually do a lot of work while you're watching YouTube. And anyone who's like, oh no, but that's, people like that.
But I'm really good at multitasking.
Yeah, I'm really good at no one's good at multitasking. Sorry. Yeah, it's just not true. And it's never been true of anyone. Now, I think there's reasons people do it, because it's got some background noise, so it eases the resistance to sitting down. If you're like doing something that doesn't require a lot of effort or thought, and then you think of transitioning to like, I'm going to sit down in this quiet void of nothing, the blank page awaits you, and then you have to create. That's very scary. So having some sort of background noise, I think really it helps people to, like, ease that transition. And I think also in a lot of cases, people are doing some work which is very menial, and it is sort of too boring. Like, if you don't have something else to watch, like, a lot of that work is kind of real menial work. But yeah, I've done a lot of the best thing you can do to prove that to yourself is just to set up a timer. So set up like a 1 hour timer. You don't really even need to do anything tricky with it. Just have a timer that counts down and just do some work. And when I did that, I noticed one thing that was very interesting. Because again, when people say this to you, like, oh, you can be like 10 times more productive by doing this thing, it's kind of like, yeah, sure, but not that much more productive. But I would notice a very interesting thing happen when I would be distracting myself versus not distracting myself, is that I would sort of press the timer, right? And I've got a timer like right up there, right, in my room, and I can just press it and it's set for like an hour. And I'll be like, okay, I'm going to do an hour's worth of work. And there's a lot of, we talk a lot about that in the productivity tips, right? Sort of timing yourself, and we'll get to that later. But the main thing I think you really have to believe is that you're not actually getting work done when you're on Facebook or YouTube, or you have any distraction, really. It's always suboptimal. Even a podcast, even music, right? You're going to get less done than if you're able to focus, just fully focus, right? And
it was interesting how much you also you trick yourself into thinking you're getting stuff done. I would encourage everyone that's like kind of trying to watch YouTube or do Facebook and work at the same time. After like 3 hours or something, go back through your history and see how much you actually did, and go like, is that 3 hours of work? And I guarantee you, it like won't be.
It won't be. Yeah. The physical output, I think, is quite easy to measure, but there's also the perception of time, which is the most interesting thing I found for myself, is that I have the timer running. So that's the factual reality, right? X amount of time is like ticking down. It's going tick, 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 tick. And I would sort of just do my normal thing where I'm like sitting there, like, and I would just sort of work. And I'd sort of, if I just work, right, working, I kind of look up and I'm like, man, I'm like halfway through this thing. Like, I bet you 5 hours has passed. I look up and it's like 10 minutes has passed. And I'm like, I'm almost done this thing that I planned to do for an hour or whatever. Conversely, if I sort of start it and then I'm like, oh, wait, I wonder whether Simon has like messaged me on Facebook. All right. And I go and check Facebook. And then I look up the timer and like half an hour has passed. And I'm like, what happened? Like, I don't even, I'm like, and Facebook is so good at that. I'm very resistant to distraction. Every single time I go on Facebook, I'm like, I just end up scrolling down that thing. So
they have mastered the scroll.
They're really good at it. I don't know what it is. There's some real magic there, like genuine magic, because I'm normally like, oh, I don't want to do this. And I think it's because it's actually the worse Facebook has gotten, the better it is for that. And I think it's like they get the content to be not interesting at all, like not enough to get you motivated or inspired or truly excited or to make you think, not bad enough that you really quit, but just good enough so that you kind of keep scrolling down to be like, surely there's got to be something better than this happening. Surely, and it's almost like the worse it is, the more I scroll. So anyway, like that was interesting for me, is I do that again and again and again. And I always find, like, if I get distracted by something and I'm like, oh, I'll just go on Facebook for 5 seconds, it feels like 2 minutes has passed. And I look up and I'm like, oh, I've been here for half an hour doing nothing. Just like looking at something and, in my head being like, that's silly. Maybe there'll be something better. Scroll. So you really have to prove to yourself those things, right? Because if you don't believe it and you're not doing it, it's really hard to have this conversation, because what happens is people are like, yeah, I hear what they're saying. Yeah, you can be more productive, but I'm really good at this. I'm special, and I'm able to, they just don't understand. And it's like, you really have to prove that.
I'm able to watch Simon and Tim's Twitch stream and do my homework at the same time.
Only if it's
That's
really
what we're saying,
boring.
right? That's what we're saying.
Only if it's like draw 1,000 spaceships or something. If it's something, yeah, I mean, because I do use this. I mean, I remember I was like inking or doing final lines on a book, and yeah, I watched the entire Lord of the Rings extended thing and all the special features, and I think that was like 16 hours. And that took me like a day and a half, right? Because I was just like, this is really boring. I'm just tracing over my own lines. It needs to be done. I'm just going to do this sort of thing and go on this. And that's like, I'm not as effective, but I'm able to stay there for longer. So overall, that thing gets done quicker, right?
Yeah.
And I think I would go through patterns where I will sort of be doing something a bit more mundane, and then I'll get in the habit of like, oh, I could like listen to something like maybe a podcast or something that has a bit more political content. So it's actually like a little bit more interesting because it's not sort of a story or it's not an audiobook or something. And that really helps me sort of get through some of that mundane work, right? It's not like a movie. I don't have to look at it. But then I kind of find if I keep doing that stuff that requires a bit more conscious effort or is likely to make me to be like, wait, what? I'm going to Google that. You know what I mean? Like that's an outrageous thing for someone to say, like really, like who's that person? Like show me a photo of that. And I kind of do that. And it's like, yeah, if you want to sit down for 12 hours and you have the time to do that, and that's a little bit less effective, but it makes my day a lot more enjoyable, I'll do that. But I always notice if I keep that habit and then I try and do something hard, like thumbnails where I've got to think about it, I'm always like super ineffective. And I almost don't actually have the mental capacity that I need to focus on that properly. And so often what happens is it just doesn't really work. You know what I mean? I kind of start doing it. I'm like, none of these are really good enough. I'm not really getting the ideas that I need. And then I remember like, I've been doing this for a week, but that's because I was doing easy work. Like I have an illustration and it's like I'm at the last stage of the illustration, right? Here's like 3 illustrations I have to do and I just have to render them all, right? Everything's done. So it's just me sitting there going like shade, 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 shade. That's boring, right? I know how to do that. It's a menial task.
Yeah.
And in that case, I'm like, I want something interesting. But, I know that is super ineffective to entertain myself, if I'm trying to do thumbnails or come up with ideas or anything like that. So yeah, I'd say the first thing is just, is there a problem, right? Like, is that, because there's no point in trying to talk about strategies to get to solve that if you sort of think that you can do this while you're watching YouTube. Like,
so we need to change people's mentality a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think so.
Hey, before we do that, Tim,
Yeah.
Let's keep this thought. We're just going to pause for a second, try and we just got a couple of little tech problems. We're going to try and work some stuff out quickly.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Had a very technical problems. No, what we were going to do was I was going to do some painting while Tim was chatting with you guys and stuff, just so you had something visually interesting to watch as well, rather than just both of our mugs on the screen.
Some art.
Yeah. So what we're all here for.
Not just talking about art,
yeah.
which is often what my lessons are like. Blah blah blah.
So
blah,
anyway,
blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
This is how you do paint. I don't need to paint anymore. I just talk about painting.
Yeah, Bradley.
You guys paint.
Bradley in the chat says, "Oh, more distractions. That's just what we need."
Yep.
Pretty much. Yep. So where were you, Tim? Sorry, I cut you off.
Well, I mean, I guess it's like what it would be good to do is sort of. I mean, I can give like a couple of like core tips, right? And I guess my experience is that when I went and worked at a studio, I felt the opposite from you. Is that I felt that like everyone was just futzing around. That was my experience working at a studio.
Maybe that was just the studio you worked at, Tim.
It could be. Yeah. I mean, it could be. Yeah, but I mean, I felt like there was a lot of presenteeism, right? But that's because if you look at my schedule, right? So again, I work from home. My schedule, like for instance, like, when I'm doing a CDW thing, right? Here's how my day works, right? I get up, and I basically do the basic stuff you need to do when you get up. And then I go for a walk for like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, because I know that like that helps. There's something about getting up and like, transitioning from one place to another place that is really useful. And I think there's a couple of things that really work when people normally go to work, right? They get this transition from where they are, and then you enter this door, right? And it's the car door or the bus door. You go through many doors, and doors are really important things with human psychology, right? And this is not, trust me, I'm not even getting woo-woo yet, right? We can go there if you want, but there is like a deeply, and I think there's a really mythological, philosophical, and also like scientific weird thing about doors. And you know that there is, because you do this thing where you're in one room and you say, "Oh, I need to go to the fridge," right? And the fridge is a door, which is interesting, but also
is this turning into a boat chat again, Tim? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, it is. But that's okay, because that's how we roll here. But these are the kind of things, right, where like I'm sitting at home and I'm like, "Oh, I'm not being as effective as possible. I'm just going to research a lot of things," right? So the way I sort of deal with a lot of these problems is like I've had to, over the last 20 years almost, right, like really figure out how this works, and why this works. And it's interesting to me. But there's a lot of factual things here that make the normal transition good, right? So a door changes your mental state drastically, right? Going through a doorway. And that's why when you go through a doorway and you're like, "Oh, I'm in the living room and I need to go to the kitchen to do a thing." You go through the kitchen door and you're like, "What was I here for? What was happening?" And like that has been sort of like, I don't know how much research they've done, but they say like, scientists have found that there's something that happens when you go through a door where it kind of wipes your brain, right? You're now somewhere else. And that's why you open the fridge and you're like, "Wait, what was I doing here?" It's like you knew before, but you go through a door and it changes your state, right? And we're conditioned that way. I don't know why. No, I'm not sure there, but there is something about having going through a door, transitioning from one place to another, and also having a ritual that involves travel, right? So you have to travel to your work, and as you travel, you undergo like a ritualistic, hypnotic induction that essentially allows you to transition who you are, right? You leave behind the things you were and your previous worries, and you sort of are allowed to kind of habitually just enter this new space.
Okay, I can deal with this stuff. I think that, sure. Why not? Yeah, I think that when I'm traveling to work in the car, I'm kind of like, you definitely go from like, "Oh, this is home mode," to now I'm in like work mode.
Yeah.
So I guess
and it
kind
doesn't
of
happen immediately.
No,
right?
and
it's a process.
I guess kind of what you're getting at is that if you're working from home, you have to try and do some of that strategy to help you get into work mode, right?
Categorically.
Yeah.
And so people who talk a lot about productivity talk a lot about morning ritual, right? It's one of the major things if you do any sort of self-help thing or any sort of productivity thing. And I think that's one of those things that people don't assume.
We're getting some funny comments in the chat, Tim, and I know you can't see it. So there's lots of it. There's people saying they run into doors. People saying I hit the top of door frames. I'm too tall. Psychological and physical doors.
Yeah, I mean, how do you walk through a wall? Yeah, you walk through the door. Magic, right? But I mean, that is weird, right? That you go through, you're in one room, you're like, oh, I need this thing, really, really. You walk through a door, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, what? Where am I? What's going on? You know, you just stare blankly, and it's like, that's a weird feeling. And that's something that happens. So I think the first thing is that the morning ritual is really important. And a lot of people probably don't feel like they're engaging in a morning ritual because they're not sort of saying like, oh, I wake up and I eat fresh granola and I drink like a liter of water. Then I meditate for half an hour. Then I go for a swim, you know what I mean? And then I contemplate my life and fill myself with gratitude. And, you know, then it's like, that's what I think what people often think about when they're talking about these positive morning rituals. And I think what people are having is like a very benign, like non-necessarily motivational morning ritual, but one that nevertheless focuses them on the task at hand and allows them to reconfigure their personality, right? And when you are faced with doing that at home, it's very difficult, right? Because you often have multiple versions of you. So this is the link that I think you have to go to understand that why you might need to do a morning ritual that's a bit different and how important it is. Like this is the kind of thing that makes a difference. Like people are very different people depending on who they're around, right?
We've got an interesting comment in the chat, Tim, which is Bradley was saying that somebody has told him that he should change up his work area to his separate gaming work computer. He was saying because the only things you want to do in your work area is work, and the same goes for your bed. You only want to rest and sleep because you're, So we're kind of all saying the same thing, right?
Yeah, totally. That's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking to you here, and this is my like streaming demo, surfing the internet computer, and over there is my work computer, and they're different. And one of them just has Photoshop on it, and I try not to load anything up like scans, like all these programs that stream and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't want that on Photoshop. I don't want that on my Photoshop machine. Because it's more likely to break. I always want a workshop there, but also because what I want my workspace work where, and sometimes I'm doing different jobs on different ones, but I want one that kind of has all the stuff for work up, so I can sit down and I'm like back where I was, right? I've got that job is up, all the reference for that job is up there, and there's just no way you can do that easily without physically using a separate computer. Right? It's like literally, if I'm working on something and I say, I'm going to keep working on this tomorrow, I want to just sit down and be instantly transported back to where I was. So that's a luxury, right? But that's also how I quit being addicted to video games is I had a separate computer. I made like completely different box, different desk, different everything. And one was for playing video games and doing other stuff. And the other was just for art. And the physical transition and the physical movement from one place to another really does like key you into a particular like way of being, right? You become different, right? And this is one of the things where it does get a bit esoteric, but I think you kind of need to do that because when you break outside the normal convention, which is going to work, right? You kind of have to figure out a lot of these things yourself, and it's really tricky to know because I think a lot of people are experiencing these things, but that's because the culture and the society kind of supports that, right? And so it's just that's what naturally happens, right? You go to work and there's things that you can and can't talk about at work. There's things you can and can't do. And there's an energy that people have in the city, right? When you go to work in the city, right? There's a particular energy. People are kind of rushing around. Everyone's like a little bit sort of stressed, and you kind of pick that up. Whereas at home, it can be really tricky. So the first thing is like morning ritual, right? Making sure that you're doing something that's
So this is cool, Tim. So we keep going with this, like keep thinking about that. We've got a couple of people asking, so what are some tips on doing this? Some people are saying that they've like at the moment they're working on the kitchen table. Other people saying got a really small room that they're working in. And obviously given the current crisis, like that's happening more and more. So I guess keep going with the strategies. Perfect.
Well, no, and so this is again, so often when I'm talking about it, like the things that I'm talking about are, if you want to do this long term and you really want to do it, right? There's a huge number of things that you can do to make yourself very effective, right? And really transition from one place to another place and make sure that, you know, you're not getting caught up in these like traps of sort of, you know, not working basically. And the thing is, a lot of those physical states, you really have to pay attention to that, right? What you respond to, how you change, where you feel productive, where you don't feel productive. And it can be really tricky if you're in one room, like if you have a bedroom, right? You're sort of still living with other people, or you're share housing or living with your parents, and you have one room, and that's for everything you do, right? The first thing to do is to make sure that you have some massive state change that occurs, right, as your morning ritual, so that you sort of transition physically away from like, now I'm sleeping and I'm relaxing and I'm doing that stuff, to now I'm sort of working, right? And I think that can do with like lighting, again, like going out of the house and then in the
Bradley
house.
asks, if I don't like walking, should I just go jump in my car, drive a few blocks, and then come back home and start working?
If you want, I mean, it's better
sounds like that would work.
yeah. Seriously, go for a drive. Go for a, you know, if you're normally used to, you know, driving around and you like driving, like do that. It will change your state driving. Do you know what I mean? We're all very different when we're driving, you know. But either way,
if not, come for a drive with me and that'll change your state.
Yep. Yeah, like I don't think it really matters, right? A lot of it is about you, right? It's not about, like, I think walking is very good because it gets your brain moving, gets your blood moving, right? Physically, also if you're struggling with getting up and the like, you know, being awake, it's really important to still, again, get out, get sun at a certain point. If you're staying in like a lowly lit house, it's very hard to get that kind of keying to kind of make you still wake up and still keep your schedule. And that's something you would naturally do when you go to work or school, is you get up, you normally go outside for a bit, right, in the transition period. And that's super important to key your body into those patterns and habits, right? So you still need to do that, right? You can't just kind of say, oh, I'm just in my bed and I'm just going to get up from my bed and sit down and do work, right? Like that is very unlikely to work for anyone. And don't feel bad if you tried that and it doesn't work. So things you can do to kind of make a strong transition between the sleeping you, right, and the working you, because that's normally how we do it, are to just make sure that you think about a morning ritual, which is, I would say the best thing you can do is to probably repeat similar steps to what you would do when you're coming into school, right? Because that's the easiest way that you can kind of quickly do that without exploring some of these deeper issues, right? When you don't have to do that, it becomes more about optimizing your sort of morning ritual and thinking about what will make you really happy, right? But I'd say, yeah, just do some similar things to what you would do when you're normally coming into CDW, right? And you have to do them every day, not just kind of like, oh, you know, this day I'm staying at home. Because I think normally it's really easy, especially when you can't go out and do anything like we are at the moment. It's really hard to get locked into bad patterns, right? That aren't going to be productive. So yeah, make sure you have some morning ritual that involves like eating, drinking, state change, you know, like have a shower, put on clothes that are similar to the clothes that you would put on if you're coming out. I always say, like, one of the things that was like a rule for me is I want always to be dressed during the day such that someone would give me a mortgage. Right? That was the best way I could explain it, right? I want to be able to, at any point, walk down to the bank and have someone take me seriously and let me borrow a huge pile of money. So that normally means, like, you know, making sure I've got shoes on and, you know, pants on and I've got a watch on and, you know, like I'm ready to go, right?
Underwear,
Like I can do
check.
that. Yep,
Socks,
exactly.
check.
Well,
maybe not socks.
and I do that a lot, right? Like that's something I sort of think about. And I found that helped, right? But I wouldn't worry too much about that stuff. I just say get a routine that involves change, right? Get up, have a shower, go outside, right? Go to a different place, and then come back and be like, okay, now I'm working, right? And that'll give you that time. Often we have that little bit of time in those little morning rituals that allows you to kind of think about, okay, this is what I was doing. You know, you're feeding your cat, you're like eating breakfast, you know what I mean? You're doing these sort of things that are very much home things, and then transitioning to like, right, I've got to do work. And you kind of forget about the things that are otherwise going to distract you, right? I think that's important. So morning ritual, it doesn't have to be a holistic, crazy ritual, but if you do want to work from home full time, I'd say that's well worth looking into, right?
Which I think is sort of somewhat different for like, say, students or whatever that are just stuck at home
totally.
at the moment.
Yeah, I'd say
because,
like,
but
keep your morning ritual going, right?
Yeah.
Keep it going, and the other thing is, you know, you probably don't have to actually travel. So, you know, like going for a walk. And the reason I say going for a walk is like, it's probably something that everyone can do. You're still allowed to do it. And it gets you, it gets blood moving. It gets your circulation going. It gets your sort of mind working a little bit. You know, you sort of come out of your cocoon a little bit. So that's the first thing, is just make sure that's happening. And again, I can explain why that's important, as you've seen, many different ways. But no one works from home without a good morning ritual, basically. And some people who are very, very productive, I've heard describe extremely elaborate, long morning rituals where, you know, they're spending 2 hours doing various things that are pre-planned and that they do every day. And that's what really works for them. But yeah, I think that the second thing is just dealing with the concept of distraction and how to be effective. And I think there's two things that are tricky there. The first is trusting that working with no distractions is actually going to help, right? Which I think we've talked about a little bit. And the other thing is,
we still get a lot of non-believers, Tim.
Yeah, look, yeah, I mean, it's really hard because you kind of can't see other people doing it, right? And we live in a presenteeism world, right? Where what is counted is being there. That's what matters. And no one's there to check whether you're there. What they're there to check now is, are you producing work? And I think you were saying that like now the way they're going to try and do remote classrooms for kids is to, you know, have them sit in front of a laptop with a webcam.
Yeah, and be in school uniform, right?
Yeah, be in school uniform. I mean, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, right? That's just, whoever thought of that is an uneducated fool.
Well, similar thing to...
End of story.
Similar thing to being dressed like you're going to the bank, isn't it?
A little bit, but the sitting down is not effective, right? It doesn't work. So this is what the other thing I'm going to say is like, look, that might work to kind of get that sort of going, but it's not going to achieve any educational outcome that's worth anything, right? Because you need to completely reconfigure that stuff if you're dealing with sort of like younger children, right? And it just doesn't make any sense. It's kind of it's a panic thing, right? It's like, what are we going to do? Oh, they're just going to be running around. Like, how do you teach people? It's like, well, that's a really big problem, right? It's basically going to make sure they're not running around at home. That's it. But
which is a pretty big thing.
Yeah, that's what everyone's actually worried about, right? Which is essentially the problem with it in the first place. But the fact is, you can get a lot of work done in a very short amount of time if you focus. And that's another one of those things where, because you don't often see a lot of people doing this, it's hard to believe. But that's really the trick, is that you don't actually have to work. You don't actually have to be there that whole time. You can probably get an 8 or 9 hour day done in 4 hours if you really work hard. if you're not messing around. If you're actually producing something, which we are, right? We're not trying to, it's not like you're having to be at a place and serve people or, be there for that whole period of time. It's about output, right? You're producing something. And so what I'd sort of play with first is there's going to be a different number of people, right? There's going to be some people who are just doing fine, right? But maybe they're not as, things could be a little bit better. And I think probably there's, I don't know, but I would imagine there's people who are doing this and they're like, yeah, this is kind of cool. Maybe, you just kind of find that you're up till 3 a.m, right? Or you're up till 2 a.m, or you it's just not as good as you'd like it to be. Or you're feeling a bit stir crazy, or you're feeling like, you don't have enough free time despite working from home. And then I think there's other people who are basically getting way, way less done than they would normally. Right. So I think there's two problems. One is like, it could be that, you're just like, getting a little bit confused between what's work and what's not work. Right. Maybe playing video games earlier in the day and saying then, I'll just, finish work later on. And then, you're kind of struggling to make all of those things work. But I think there's also probably a large number of people who, and let me know in the chat, right? If this is, because I can see the chat, it's a bit lagged, but I think there's probably going to be a bunch more people who are really struggling, right? Where they're like, I'm not getting anything done. Like
so someone is saying they've got AHAD, right. Stuff like that. So there's obviously all sorts of different circumstances that can arise, right?
Mm-hmm. Look, I would say the same things apply. But that's not, I'm not a medical professional and I'm not allowed to comment on that sort of thing. But yeah, so I'd say I'd talk to those two different scenarios, right? I guess that's what I'm going to do. Is I think you will find that I think the ideal thing to try and do is to try and compress the amount of work you're doing, right? Compress it in time and make sure it's focused work, because that does work, right? There's been lots of research has been done on that, but you're much better off doing that, right? You're going to be much more productive. And the other thing is, take advantage of the fact that you can time shift those things to do some stuff that you might want to do, right? That's not your homework and not your schoolwork, right? Such as, I don't know, you can't actually do much now. I mean, normally you can do a lot, but because we're all stuck inside. But yeah, you can work on your own personal pieces as well, right? Try and schedule some time in for that, or some time playing games or watching movies. But in that case, I think your mental health and everything is going to be hugely benefited from trying to compress the work time and then relax when you're watching a movie or playing a game. Like really enjoy it, because you're free, because you've done your work. Like that to me is the goal that you should be heading towards. If you're sort of just struggling with this a bit, it's like, cool, you're home, you got nothing to do, right? How many hours do you sleep? Let's say 9 hours, good sleep, right? Recommended more than 7.5. Cool. And let's say, you sort of spend, 4 hours doing other stuff like eating and, just doing house chores or whatever, right? Doing stuff that's necessary, that's hard to avoid. So you've got sort of 11 to 12 hours free, right, to do your work and then do recreational activities. And what I'd say still the CDW workload, I reckon you're really only expected to be working that sort of 7 or 8 hours a day, right? Like the workload should be feasibly possible if you're working 50 hours a week, right, Simon? Would you say that's probably true?
Oh yeah, I don't think even anywhere near 50 hours a week.
Yeah, like if you're actually sitting down doing homework,
if you were just
looking at stuff like contact hours of you doing homework, it's like you should be able to do it in 50 hours of normal work, right? 10 hours a day. So I think if you work towards trying to compress that, right, I think you should be able to get most of your CDW work done in 5 hours a day, right? If you're actually focused. Now, I'm not saying that that's easy, and I'm not saying that that's going to work for everyone, but I'd say as something that you can work towards, I think that's something you should play around with. Is like, think about if you can get all that work done in 5 hours of not watching YouTube, of not watching movies, of not being on anything, right? Of not listening, not being on here on Twitch, right? This is R&D, right? This is you optimizing stuff. This is not working. You're not doing this, right? Just work 5 hours. That means you've got 6 hours to play video games every day. Like guilt-free playing video games that you want to play. And that's how I think about it. And that's possible. And people do that. And I think you'll enjoy playing video games a lot more and you'll enjoy watching a movie more when you're not sitting there thinking like, I should be working. But it's very exciting and interesting and stimulating, I think, for people to get into those stressful environments, right? I think people often, it's so exciting that people are kind of like, oh, you know, I'm so used to playing video games. And I think a lot of the times is you find you don't actually want to play 6 hours of video games if you're not doing it to procrastinate working, right? That's one of the things that we actually do is we engage in these escapist activities to kind of block all this stuff out. But
to stop thinking about how do I draw the bloody cube.
yeah, you're like, oh, don't think about that, or or all of that stuff. So yeah, that's the first thing I'd say is like try and do that. And the first step towards that is just trying to time yourself. So using the timing techniques, people talk about like the Pomodoro method, right? The tomato timer, which is like a 20-minute, sort of 25-minute timer. And that's where you basically just, you organize this focus, because the reality is you can't actually focus for that long. So you get a lot more done, but you can't actually just work for these extended periods of time if you are focusing. So what I'd suggest is trying to compress the amount of work time you get, and do it by timing yourself, and make sure you take breaks, right? But not breaks to go and play video games, breaks to just literally physically, mentally rest. And again, keep in mind, this is with the goal that you can then play 6 hours of video games a day, right? So I'm not saying like no fun, it's just work. I'm saying like, no. You can watch the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy after you do this work in one big go and eat popcorn and ice cream, like whatever you want. Okay, so this is not, because that's the big thing is I feel like we often have working hard being linked to like a deprivation mentality of fun, if that makes sense. I don't know whether that resonates with you, Simon, right? But I remember worrying about that, right? Sort of like, as long as I'm working, then I'm not sort of failing. And like people often think like, if I work really hard, then that means you can't have fun. And I'm saying like what I would do for fun is try and...
So I somewhat agree with that. I also think that I've always kind of found working fun, right? Like I find it stressful from time to time, like even when you've got like deadlines and things, right? Like there's stressful things, but I've always found the like drawing, painting side of it is like eating ice cream. It's like as soon as I'm doing that, it's like, oh my god, this is so fun. Writing emails and stuff, not so fun. But also I'm in that different situation where I do a lot more kind of admin stuff that's not just drawing. So then I actually it's probably interesting because I've probably forgotten as well. Like I definitely have that when I am painting and stuff. It's like, oh my god, this is like awesome. I'm having a great time. But I think that I think I did have moments when I was like really freelancing heavily that it was not always a great time, and it was mostly because of deadline pressure, right? Yeah.
Or doing something, again, you're under pressure and you're not quite sure how to do it, or you know what I mean? You're not sure whether you're going to be able to do the job you want, the quality you want in the time you've got. There's a lot of things, which can kind of make that a lot more stressful. So, anyway, I think it's like, again, just keep in mind a lot of the things I'm saying, I think you can choose to play video games in your free time, or you can choose to do personal work in your free time, right? And a lot of what I'm also talking about is sometimes I think some of the CDW assignments can bridge that gap, and sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes they are a little bit more technical and you don't want to, you kind of want to really focus on them. Others you might find that, it's better if you give yourself a long time and kind of enjoy the process a bit. And I know you guys have got other sort of tasks, like some, often there's questionnaires, or you've got to write essays and things like that. So just make sure that you keep control of that. And if you have something that does require a lot of focus, you just get rid of distractions and get onto it, right? And then give yourself some free time every day, and give yourself breaks every hour, right? Every 50 minutes. So say I'm going to do, an hour of work, and every, 50 minutes, you take 10 minutes off, get up, doesn't matter what else is going on, just break that spell and then sit down later, 10 minutes later, and keep going. And then, every couple of hours, you take half an hour off, or maybe an hour off, and you do just sort of chill out stuff. But again, keep in mind that when I say take time off, you're still working, you're still focused, you're just not focusing, right? So it's really important to view that as like, don't jump on Facebook, don't distract yourself, right? It's about really like not focusing on the job, but still thinking about it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yep.
I think that's super key, because I think today we're so used to, and especially if you have ADHD or something like that, it's really hard to relax and rest your brain without distraction, right? Without looking at some YouTube thing or whatever. And I think it's really important that you're sort of say, well, look, for these 4 hours, right, I'm gonna, let's say you want to do 4 hours work, or 5 hours work. I think the best way to do that is sit down for 50 minutes, take a 10-minute break, sit down for another 50 minutes, take a 10-minute break, right? And, really just kind of chill out for those 10 minutes. And then take, obviously after that, take a half-hour break or something, right? But it has to be a break, right? It's literally like, go outside, look at the trees, right? Do something that's not stimulating. Then come back and do 50 minutes again, right? Take a break, 50 minutes again, and then take 2 hours off, right? Do something that's genuinely, relaxing or whatever. But again, you could watch a movie or something, and then do another 2 hours, or in that case, you only want to do 5, then do another hour, right, of like super focus, and that's it. Then you're done. But I think often what happens is people do like 50 minutes, and then they kind of jump on YouTube or something, and then you get distracted and you're not really focused. And that means that you don't have 6 hours to play video games in the end. You kind of have 2 because you've sort of you haven't really been as effective as enough. And the other thing is to trust that process, so that as you get this working, you make sure at the end of each day, at the end of each like sort of work session, right, you really do give yourself permission to do fun things that you want to do, right, that are pure recreation, so playing video games, watching movies, whatever you want, or going for a run, or going for a walk, or talking to someone on Skype, do you know what I mean, if you can't go catch up with people, or doing personal artwork, working in your sketchbook, do you know what I mean, going on ArtStation, like looking at cool art, whatever it is, right, you make sure you have a good chunk of that. And you make sure that breaks up your workday, right? So that you're able to have a big period of like relaxation after you do your work, right? Before you go to bed, right? I think that's super important. Because the other thing that people do is, sort of just the real danger is what you find, and I think this is that, I don't know whether this works for you, Simon, or resonates for you, but I think the pattern that people normally get into is they do a bunch of work, but they kind of leave it till the last minute. So you end up working at night, again, as you're saying, till 3. And then you kind of are exhausted and you wake up, but you're often not really ready when you wake up to just jump back into work. Like I've often found is like, I sort of would wake up after I'm, a bit tired, mm-hmm. and I don't have energy, right, to do it, because I just was doing it 8 hours ago. And so I'd often find I'd like futz around and do a whole bunch of stuff. And
you mean 3 hours ago?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. If you have young kids and you need to get up. But yeah, I find it's really hard to just go again and put focus in. And often what happens is then you sort of have to repeat that pattern. So whatever pattern you have one day, you will find you tend to repeat it the next day, because you have a natural kind of like flow of like working, not working, sleeping, right? Or sort of like working, sleeping, not working, sleeping, not working, right? It kind of tends to go in that thing, because you need a break, right? Otherwise, what happens is if you really just try and work, you sort of sit down and you'll kind of just be like vague, and you're not actually able to be focused. right? You can physically force yourself to work, go to sleep, wake up, work, but you'll find you're not actually being very effective. That's my experience with that.
My thing I found is like I was never actually doing much work at 3 a.m. in the morning either.
Right.
Like I always look back and I was like, this I didn't actually get anything done because by 3 a.m. you're so tired, you like unless you had a 3 hour sleep or whatever, right? But by 3 a.m. you're just like, I had to be doing other things to keep me like awake, you know.
Right.
I've eaten so much sugar, I've had so many cups of coffee. I'm like watching late night TV to like keep wired. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then I look back in the next day and I'm like, I only did like I was up for 5 extra hours, but I only really did an hour's worth of useful work. So after a while, I'm just like, maybe I should just go to bed and just get back up, you know, a bit earlier or whatever, and just reset that way.
Yes.
But it's obviously super hard when you got deadlines, and I'm sure like heaps of guys on here have like got like 4 different assignments due all at the same time. They're like, oh shit, how do I get this done? It's like
totally.
It is difficult. Like it takes a lot of practice to get good at that stuff.
You know, it's no joke. None of this is easy, right? Yeah. Well, I mean, I was have to get up at 6, right? Like, so I would just go to bed at 5 in the morning and wake up at 3 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And that's what I would just do all the time for years.
Which I think is somewhat different than like, going to,
the thing is I'd sort of get in this habit of like pushing the deadlines. What's that? Sorry?
Yeah. Which I think is kind of different than like going to bed at 3 a.m. and then having to get up at 9 a.m. for class or whatever, or having to get up at 7 because you got to, or 6:30 because you got to catch the bus and go to class or whatever the case may be. Like, I think that sleep is really important, even though I'm the worst advocate of that of all time. Like I always just go to bed late and get up early. So my thing at the moment is I've been getting up at 5 every morning because then I kind of get a couple of hours of like alone time. But my alone time is doing work. But I just still go to bed at the same time. So getting 4.5 hours sleep every night is not ideal. Yeah. And you just become unproductive over a while. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing that I sort of noticed when I was doing a lot of freelancing is that, and I noticed this when I was working on the bigger projects, is that I would get used to this freelancing thing where you have a bunch of deadlines and then the deadlines end, right? And then the deadlines are over and then you're kind of free. So you have this natural kind of ability where often you actually do have these days free and you're trying to like rush deadlines and stuff like that. And that might be more the experience of students, right? Where you do have these kind of crunchy deadlines that can get you. But I sort of noticed that, I'd really like push deadlines and try and, like get stuff happening for my comic because I got paid on a certain day. That would be the thing is I'd know that I sort of get paid on a particular day. And so the task was to make sure that by that day I had done X number of pages. So that was sort of my deadline. It wasn't self-imposed, but I was like, if I don't have like 10 pages for this month done, then I don't get paid that much. So I'd sort of rush and I'd be like, I got to get all these sort of things done. And I have this deadline. And then I'd be like, I did it. I finally stayed up late for like 5 days in a row, and I felt really busy. And then I kind of just lay around in a daze for 2 days.
100%.
Where am I? What's going on? I'm just so tired. And no amount of saying like, and you know what? Because I'd always say, man, I'm never doing this again, right? Never doing this again. I'm going to tomorrow I'm going to get up and do work. And
it's like it's like when you drink too much and have a little meeting with the toilet bowl. Never doing this again, but well, depending on your nature, sure enough, it'll happen again.
It'll happen. Well, I found that like I was just so exhausted that I couldn't really then put in normal hours the next day. Like I would just I'd sort of be sitting down at the desk and kind of staring into the void. So what I sort of found was like I was actually able to get exactly the same amount of work done just by sort of doing a little bit each day, every day, all throughout the month. And then I didn't have this kind of exciting crash and like, rise and fall. And I was like, oh, maybe I should just keep doing that.
So I think
Right.
that's really interesting because I think a lot of people work off the adrenaline of that deadline, and we're kind of getting some little comments like that in the chat as well, where it's like that is a big thing. But you got to remember, whenever there's like a kind of whenever there's a up, there's a down, and I think you 100% have that kind of like down, which can also be like a creative down as well, right? Where it can really affect your mental state in terms of wanting to be creative and doing all of those things, which is really hurtful to what you're trying to kind of do.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I talk about when we do the productivity series is, which again gets a little bit sort of scientific, is that, and I'll just go over it briefly because a lot of you either heard it or I'm not going to be able to explain it in enough detail. But essentially, when you're doing art, you're in flow, which is again, it's like there's a guy who wrote a book called Flow, and people have sort of described this phenomena, but that's sort of the name we sort of have for it, which is where you're kind of just completely in the zone, right? You're involved in what you're doing, right? Which is probably close to what I can tell Simon's a little bit like that now, right? He's just painting. And when I ask him a question, he's like, what?
What did you say?
Yeah, like Simon's verbal brain is not engaged, right? He's using a sort of the artistic brain, right? And he's maybe not completely in flow, but I think because he's been doing this
I'm
so
definitely
long,
not completely in flow.
No,
the way this painting's going.
but I think that sort of is what happens is we move more and more into a state of being in the zone, being non-verbal. And that's kind of what they say, like a lot of extreme athletes and people like that enter these states where you need to be hyper focused, right? I think there was a couple of them that were talking about flow, people who do extreme rock climbing, right? Where you're free climbing, like, those people who are like on the side of a giant mountain and there's nothing. Do you know what I mean? No ropes, no nothing. And it's like, if you slip once, you die. That puts you in such an extreme state of focus that you kind of just go into the zone, and a lot of stuff turns off. And that's essentially where most art is done, right? You sort of are in the zone. Same thing for sporting things. And that's why when I talk in the first year, sort of week one stuff, I talk about the fact that drawing has more in common with a sporting or sort of musical sort of activity or something like that, right? It's much more of a physical thing because you transition into that modality, right? You're in the zone. Now, the thing with that is that kind of, and the reason I talk about that in the productivity thing is that state is, I forget which exact sort of brain state it is, but it's sort of it's sort of at a particular frequency of brain activity, and it's kind of not the conscious one, right? It's sort of it's when you go into flow, your brain registers at the same level as if you are relaxed, right? And this is why people meditate to sort of try and get into those flows. You're relaxed, and then there's a point below relaxation that's kind of sleep, right? Where you lose consciousness, right? You essentially cease being aware that you are there, right? You lose that consciousness. And flow kind of happens just between those two levels, right? So flow and our art sort of happens below alertness, right? And so when you're in that flow, you're not really able to kind of, again, like if you break out of it, right? You've got to be like, wait, what, where am I? And that's sort of where it's been registered. It's been recorded at that brain frequency. And so I think why people gravitate towards the deadlines and the crunching is that the other thing is that often what good creative practice involves is like not editing yourself, right? And again, I don't know whether that resonates with you as well, Simon, right? But that's something that we talk about a lot. But you kind of want to create stuff and then not like get your little voice, right? To say like, oh, this is crap. This is not working, right? Like this is, you want to kind of just be able to create stuff and not have, an internal voice or like a negative voice kind of complaining at you. And yeah, I mean, so that's the kind of thing where it gets like a little bit more esoteric. I don't know whether you have things to say about that. Is that something you sort of experience?
And this is an interesting thing is Saxon also says they find it hard to take breaks when in flow. And how do you take a break without breaking it, so to speak? And it is interesting because like sometimes when you get into this, you literally like hours and hours will pass by. And like, I can start doing a painting like this and I'll be like, oh, it's 6 p.m. I need to go home and, feed the kids or whatever. But I'm just like, I really don't want to. So, do you have any tips for that kind of stuff as well?
Sure do. So what you actually want to build the muscle for is the ability to go in and out of flow easily. Right. So that's the goal, is that you have the ability to put yourself into flow or put yourself close to a point of flow effortlessly and easily. And I think this happens and this builds over time. Right. But yeah, the trick with the taking a break when you're in flow is, yes, you should still take the break. Yes, that might be very weird because you're like, oh, but I was just getting into it, right? Take the break, right? I swear that's what you need to do. What it does is it lets your subconscious mental, physical system trust that you're going to get a break. If you don't trust that you're going to get a break, it's very hard to focus. We always leave something in reserve, right? And that's what happens when we're on these big sort of grindy deadlines, right? Where you're just working and working, is you're never able to fully focus because your brain knows like, yeah, I'm not going to go all in on that, right? Again, that's the best colloquial way I can explain it, is your body is not going to trust that it's going to get a break. So it's not going to put on the full effort, right? It's not going to dump all its focus reserves on this thing. Once you get into the habit of taking a break, like, this is not going to last forever. That makes it a lot easier for you to actually commit to that and not worry about like, oh, this is boring. You know what I mean? Because you've got the carrot now, right? You're like, oh, but I need to focus really hard here. But once this is done, I can go and do whatever I want. I can be free from that self-discipline. So interesting things happen there when you start to practice and get into a habit of taking that, right? You're able to focus more. If you trust that you can take a break. The other thing is that I think the skill you actually want to develop is not being in flow for a long time, right? And being worried that you're going to lose it. What you want to do is be very relaxed if you go in and out of flow.
So it's interesting that you say that this is kind of like a skill you can develop. Do you want to like elaborate on that?
Well, I would say it's just like a muscle like any other. Right? The better you get at this, the easier it is to kind of just sit down and kind of go into that zone. And so having that, because essentially we just run on as a habitual system, right? And a lot of those habits of sort of getting distracted or like if you're you can't go into flow, for instance, if you're thinking about maybe someone's going to distract me, right? Your brain kind of is sitting there going like, I can't commit to this. So anxiety or thinking about other people and things stops you going into flow. So there's lots of things that you need to practice on and make sure, you have a little space that's safe that you can, you can kind of like zone in on. Literally if you practice stopping flow, but not going and watching YouTube, right? I didn't say go and play video games. I'm not saying like go and do something distracting. I'm saying stop and relax. Like literally go outside your balcony. If you're in an apartment block, right? Go and look out the window and breathe and like close your eyes and relax, like honestly relax. It's not about distraction. It's just about physically changing your state and just recuperating a little bit of that stuff, right?
Because it's going to be hands up who finds when they go to take a break or get distracted that it then takes like 20 minutes to get back to the same spot you kind of were, right? You guys should actually time how long that takes and then be like, oh, I really don't want to distract myself, e.g. go on
Yeah.
like Facebook and scroll, and then go back to painting. That's why things take so long. That's why painting takes 5-6 hours when it should really only take an hour, because you're basically going in and out of this kind of state, mental state people call it like creative block. Why have I got like creative block or whatever? Like it's
Yep.
that kind of thing. We're not talking about some sort of spiritualistic stuff. It's just like when you're in that mode of working without kind of thinking too much about it. So like driving a car, right? When you drive a car in the morning into wherever it is, you kind of just arrive magically. And it's kind of like the similar thing. It's like you kind of go into that zone of like, because actually when you think about it, when you first start driving the car, you actually have to think about it. You got to put the car in reverse, you got to drive back, you got to think about that, blah blah blah, get going, look at the stop, and then after a while you just like doing it on an autopilot. And it's a similar sort of thing, I think.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, this is why you've probably, I don't know whether you heard a lot of those long talks I do in first year before. You've probably heard some of them more now, but that's why I prattle on for like an hour about the fact that we're actually designed to learn things just habitually by doing them. We're actually quite good at learning how to drive a car, considering how many people manage to do it. Right? It's not like it's expected you can. And a lot of people are like, whoa, I can't do this. You know what I mean? And eventually you're just like, yeah, it's like, again, it's like riding a bike.
There's a lot of people that don't do it well though, Tim.
Driving a car.
Oh yeah.
I'm pretty surprised, right? I mean, yeah, and there's a lot of people doing it while they're distracted, and sometimes they die. And other people die, right? It's a real thing. But given how people take for granted, like, yeah, that concept of riding a bike, we're actually quite good at this, right? If you practice something and prime yourself, we're actually very good at going into mental states, different mental states. But I think a lot of people don't consciously take control of this and like, do the meditation or like trying to focus on being present or any of that stuff, which feels too like woo-woo and crazy. They kind of just like, yeah, they get into a car and all of a sudden they're a completely different human. Right. And they're doing all this stuff automatically. And it's like, we sort of take that for granted. I think those same mechanisms make it quite easy for you to practice how to go in and out of like a mental state like flow. It's not that it's easy. And if you're distracted, that's sort of tricky, but you learn what works for you. And I think you get better at it. Right. So it's a lot easier to get better at it. And I think you get better at it by practicing. And the way you practice is to be in it, and then after a certain period of time to break from it, and then try and get back into it. And again, if it doesn't work, then or something's not working, that's really important, because that you're building your ability to navigate that sort of stressful situation, right? And the more you do it, the better you get it. Because I think long term, that's a really important thing to have. It's got nothing to do with working from home or whatever. I think that's super useful.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's the thing. Is like, take the break, go in and out of flow, and eventually you'll be able to have a conversation with someone and not really break flow as much as you can. If you're working with someone and they know that like you can talk about some things but not other things, you can kind of stay pretty relaxed, stay in that sort of zone. Maybe answer a couple of questions and then go back, right? And it's very easy to transition around, right? And almost what you'll find is like the act of like sitting back down, going back to where you were, will be enough of like an induction to allow you to just go back. Whereas if you're afraid and then you keep working until you kind of burn out, that's just what you're practicing. You're just practicing that. Whereas if you practice the other thing, you get better at it, right? And I think it's worth spending 3 years of your life trying to practice doing that, right? Until you get good at it. But yeah, now I think I find that stuff a lot easier. Because the danger of working from home is you have lots of distractions, right? That's why something I'm like, I don't know how much we can solve that sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? Unless you're doing this for years. But if someone kind of, knocks on the door and it's like, oh, I have mail to be delivered. Like, I'm pretty good these days at just sort of getting up, doing that, and then sitting back down, and like nothing's really changed. But I think what's happening there is a lot of sort of mental gymnastics, right? It's just like you're used to sitting down, like the sitting down at the desk, and that's the desk that's only used for that, is sort of useful. So
I think what's interesting is it does seem like it definitely is a practice thing that you can get better at it over time, which is kind of cool
You
for
definitely
people
can.
that are struggling with that at the moment.
Well, I think
Hope
the
is
other
not
thing
lost.
is like, yeah, well, the other thing is like, don't view these. I think there's probably some good opportunity to sit down and be and be practicing some of these things that I think can help you regardless of what you're doing, regardless of whether you're at home in isolation, right? These are things that will help you be a better artist anyway, is really building those muscles, right? And dealing with those things. But the reason I was talking about that stuff in relation to the deadlines and the working them, burning the midnight oil and stuff, is because when you're tired, right, the flow happens when you are, again, where you're super relaxed and you're drifting into unconsciousness. And it's kind of a particular mental state. And if you are tired, you're naturally more likely to go into flow, right? Because you're almost there anyway. Like, I mean, one of the things that occurred to me that, again, is completely unfounded, but I think is sort of interesting is like you often read a lot of like manga and there's a real surrealness to some of it, right? There's a real creative life to it where you really feel like anything can happen, right? It's the very lateral creative sort of thing. And I think that's because they're all so tired, right? Every manga artist is just literally running on like 3 hours sleep for like 5 years, and I think like if you're in that state where you're sleep deprived and you're creating stuff, I think like magical things will happen, right? Not for your health,
I think that's
but
why
certainly
probably
for your creative process.
Yeah, and like everyone's heard of that whole thing of like, oh, keep a notepad by your bed because you kind of think of stuff as you going to sleep. Like you definitely do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And again, like people talk about, being in the shower, or like, again, some people talk about going for a walk or when you're drifting off to sleep.
The shower is my
like,
thing. I'm like, that's my like, oh, I thought of that. Let's do this painting that way.
I mean,
always in the shower.
we all know these things happen, right? But the trick is like, you can utilize some of those. You can, I mean, have a few showers a day, right? You might come up with more ideas. I mean, why not? Not good for water, but I mean, think about that. So I think a lot of the reason it's not just like, I work best when I'm under crunch and deadline. I'm like, sure, try this. Okay. Just make 5 personal projects that you really want to do. Right. And just sort of try and be really busy anyway, because I think you can always be busier. Like I am useless if I'm not busy. I just sit around doing nothing. I can only function if I've got too much work to do. And that's really tricky for me because I'm often working really hard and I'll sort of say, once I'm done with all this work, then I'll just, work on all these personal projects that I've been thinking of. And then I finish all my freelance work and then I sit around being like, what I really want to do is like fix that fence, or, I'm like, I should mow the lawn. All these other things sort of appear to me. And I was like, previously I was sort of sitting there going, oh my God, I've got this great idea for this thing. I just need like 5 minutes and I can create this amazing thing. I just need to write down these ideas, but I can't because I've got all this freelance work on. I got all this stuff and I just can't do it. And it's this massive like creative like frustration and like energy. And as soon as I'm sitting around, it's like, oh, you got the next 2 weeks off to do nothing. I'm just kind of like, actually, I think I'll go clean the toilet. That really needs doing, and I think I'll do that. And
I think that's
I just
also
end up doing.
That's sometimes a product
nothing.
I think of like after you have been doing this for a long time as well. It's like not quite as maybe the thrill's not as exhilarating, right? So you kind of get into that like. Yeah, because I think like back in the day when that would happen, you'd just be like, yeah, I've got all the stuff that I'm going to do and I do it. And you kind of get some of that out of your system, I think, to a degree.
Yep. Yeah. Well, what I find works is I just try and always stay in that state of mind of I have too much stuff to do. And some of that's, I just make sure that that's not just freelance work, right? I've got other things that I need to do. And as soon as I'm busy, I kind of feel that same energy. So it's like, yeah, put yourself under crunch, but crunch when it's 9 a.m. and you got plenty of time. That's possible. I think it's just a matter of some mental gymnastics, right, to do that. But that's totally possible, right? You just need to like get up, and it's like, yeah, get up 7 a.m. and you've got to start to imagine that it's 12 at night and you got 3 hours to finish this thing, or the world ends, right? And you're in big trouble. Like, there's no reason you can't engage that. There's no reason, right? That's what I try and do. So do that, try and instead of like crunching late at night, try and crunch earlier in the day, and set a deadline for yourself and really try and match it, right? So, get up and say like, I'm going to start working at 9 and I've got 3 hours, right, to do this assignment. And that's it. Really try and put the pressure on yourself for that and be like, I've only got this amount of time, because I think also having a limited amount of time, being a bit tired, really focuses your brain, and you stop kind of fussing around and being like, oh yeah, I'm tried to do this, but it's not quite as good as I thought I'd be. And maybe I'll just go and look at something and I'll try and better. Whereas when you've got to do it and you've got 3 hours to do it because you're tired and you've got to get up and go to school the next morning and it's due, there's all that adrenaline, all that excitement, focuses your mind, and you forget. It almost doesn't matter whether the end result is crap. It's just the act that you finished it gives you such an adrenaline rush, right? I don't know whether I'm sure that resonates for you, Simon, that idea of like, you're working on a deadline and it's really exciting whether you finish it or not, right? Like if you, no matter what you do, you're like, oh, it doesn't even matter. I just finished it. Look,
So
and it's
actually,
kind of crappy painting, but
no, so one thing I say in my class all the time that I'm really big on kind of telling students is that sort of like leveling up art process, and you kind of only get that from finishing stuff. And there's something that happens when you finish some. And so my thing is like, rather than trying to paint something really complicated, do something really simple. Finish it, level up. Do something a little bit more complicated. Finish it, level up. Do something, and almost like build up. Don't start with your first painting. And I see this, everyone does it. I go, free choice painting. And everyone goes, I'm going to do a giant sci-fi city with 500 ships and blah, 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 and all this. And like, if I got that as a brief, I'd be like, oh my God, how am I going to do this, right? And you're trying to do that for your very first painting that you do in life. It's just, no, I'm being facetious, but you get what I mean, right? It's like, why are you inserting so much pain into your life, right? Just do a little simple thing. And then, but we have that feeling of like, so along with the leveling up thing, we really have a feeling of like, we want to jump ahead and do, so like whenever you see a demo, right? Like you see a tutorial on Gumroad, you kind of like got to skip to the end to see what they did. And then you just want to do that. And you don't want to do any of the, you've actually got to remember that someone might have had, they might have taken 10 years to build up to that point of being able to do this particular thing, but you just want to do it like right now. It's like, whoa, just hold on. And I know at the moment I've been learning like Blender and stuff. So I've been really trying to catch myself and be like, okay, just pull it back, be like, okay, this is what I need to learn. This is what I need to do with this. Don't try and do like the whole gigantic thing. Because whenever you do that, it ends in disaster, right? So you've got to like kind of always pull back, keep things simple, and then just go like, oh yeah, I got that thing done. Okay, I know how to do that. Let's move on to the next thing. And it actually makes you less anxious about the process of learning.
Yeah. Like manage the stress, and try and make sure there's a good level of challenge, right, with each sort of time, with each sort of amount. Totally. And so anyway, I mean, I forget where we were exactly going with a lot of that stuff, because a lot of those things are kind of they sort of blend into one. But I'd say just play around with that stuff. And the other thing I always sort of say is you can put lots of deadline pressure on yourself and practice trying to do that and trying to rush, even if it's not real, right? And then when it's done, you can decide, like, do you want to do another hour, right? But that's sort of done. But maybe do another hour tomorrow, like try and really kind of work on it, but do sprints, right? Don't do the marathon thing. Really sit down and focus on doing that, and set yourself a deadline, and try and match it, try and get there, try and do that thing. I think that'll serve you a lot better, as opposed to actually waiting until it's due, for one reason. The one reason is very simple.
There's finger pointing.
Yeah, finger pointing. Because we've been through that battle at 3 a.m., because you have beaten that dragon, right? You are the hero of your own little crunch at night fantasy. You did it. You completed it. You feel really good about it. I think one of the things there is you don't have a good image of what the actual finished product is anymore. Because when you see it, you imagine the adversity you faced to just do it. Right? Like, well, but I did it and I only had all this time and look how successful this is. And I think if you compare that to putting a deadline on yourself at 9 a.m, right, to be finished this thing by 12, you're going to finish that thing at 12 and be like, it's not that good because I didn't feel that emotion. The emotion you feel has got nothing to do with the painting, right? And I think that's often very hard to understand, is you need to disassociate your like emotional state while you're doing the painting from the quality of the painting, and try and figure out a way that you can feel good while you are doing a painting that's not under deadline pressure, so that you feel that there is some excitement, right? That there is meaning to doing it and that you're fulfilled by it, because the finished result doesn't, right? We feel like I think we feel very excited because we often it's because like, you kind of wake up in a daze, you've been up, for ages, you haven't got any sleep, you kind of stumble into class and you hand it up and you're like, you never really get a chance to assess that. And any sort of criticism is kind of like, well, you're saying that, but maybe if I had more time, I would have done a better job, right? There's all this bullshit that is, that's sort of in the place of you actually seeing, like, is that a good painting? And I think when we finish a painting and we've got time after it, it always feels like, oh, I could have done better, right? The painting's not that good because you're actually seeing it for what it is. It's not associated with all this emotional excitement.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important, that people don't see. Again, it's the feeling of like, does it feel like you did a really good painting, or did you do a really good painting, right? They're different things. And I think when we're up on deadline, excitement, you're sitting there, you're wired, you're full of sugar and caffeine, and you're kind of like, oh, I'm doing all this stuff, and you kind of finish it and you're like, yes, look, it doesn't completely suck. It feels like the painting's going to be better than it might be. It might be good. It might not be good. You're not going to be able to tell because you're just excited you finished it. And that's a very different feeling. You never get that feeling of excitement when you finish a painting when you plan to, and it's well above time. You're like, oh, cool. Well, I'll hand this up in 2 days when it's due. You don't get that excitement, but that has nothing to do with the quality of the painting. So the trick is to feel the excitement and get yourself excited about working on it when that's not happening, right? I think that's really important. I don't know what you think about that, Simon, but yeah, that's something I took me a long time to realize that.
I think a lot of this stuff just does take a long time, and a lot of stuff is like, sometimes you just have to go through the pain to kind of work that stuff out as well. I mean,
yeah,
there's some stuff you can tell people, but it's, yeah, like you can lead a horse to water, type of thing, right? Like, yeah, it's sort of like, we can tell you this stuff, so it's good to look out for, but you're probably going to have to make some of these, mistakes, and I'm sure some of you already are, and you connecting with some of the things we're talking about and all that kind of stuff. But it's also okay to, it's okay to have some of these failures and stuff as well, right? It's just trying to kind of learn from them as well. And I think, like, a good thing that Tim and I are kind of talking about is like, you can learn from this stuff, right? And you can, do dumb stuff and watch plenty of YouTube or scroll on Facebook and everything will still be okay. You'll still be fine. It's just, you can.
What
I'd
say is just be aware. Just pay attention when it happens. And now that we've said this, it's like, I'm not expecting that anyone's going to be able to instantly change all these things. Some of them are long-term things. I think doing the routine and the ritual, I think that will help a lot of people, right?
Kind of straight away. That's a good.
Yeah, straight away. And I think some of these other things are just there to kind of say, like, if you're having real trouble, try this. Do you know what I mean? Try just focusing on a smaller amount of work. Make sure you give yourself some recreational time every day that's not work. I would recommend doing that before you go to bed, right? So don't work right at the end of the day. Try and separate that out. And even if it means like, okay, it's 4 now, you haven't done any work for today, I think you're better off taking the rest of the day off and trying to plan to get up tomorrow morning and do some work at the right time. You're better off doing that, right? Because at least then you're setting that pattern and that habit, right? And the other thing is make sure you're taking the weekends off if you can. Don't just burn out. Because when you burn out, like, it always feels like we're doing more work than we are. You kind of sit down and like, oh, I'm sitting here. I sat here for 9 hours and I did some stuff, right? That's got to be worth something. And it's like, not really. The trick is, like, the only thing that matters is, like, how is the journey for you? Are you enjoying it? And what is your output, right? Don't worry about being present, like this thing happening or that thing happening. Just focus on, like, what's your output, and are you having fun? And I think there's plenty of ways to make sure that you do enjoy the process if it's not under deadline pressure. And that's something that might take a lot longer. But I think that is worth examining regardless, right? I think that's got nothing to do with being stuck at home here. Do you know what I mean? I think that's like something that will help you no matter what's happening. It's just here you've sort of, we're forced to do that. And I think it's very easy for people to really fall off the wagon, right? And end up not doing much. So the other thing I'd say is about the bedrooms and people with weird sort of operating environments.
Where are we going here, Tim? We're talking about the bedroom.
If you're living, eating, breathing, if you're stuck in your bedroom and that's where you work, play video games, sleep, and everything, just realize that is a really, really suboptimal way to make all this work. So things that you could do are just make sure you control the environment that you are doing particular types of things in. Because that is a really, really easy way to make a big state change. So, one of the things I do is, I do most emails or CDW class planning stuff. I just don't do it in this room. This is my work room. This is my work desk. This is where I do drawing. And I do all that stuff. I just go sit outside and do it. Even if it's cold, do you know what I mean? I put on a jacket and go outside and do it. Or failing that, I'll do it on the kitchen table. Normally if I can't do that, I'll go to a cafe or something, which you can't do at the moment, but, go to a park, do it there, right? Like, try and separate out when you're working, doing art versus when you're replying to emails or uploading art, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, do your work in a particular time and then go and upload it and do your flow stuff separately. Reply to emails separately. Do it in a different room, right? Take your laptop, go and do it somewhere else. The other thing is, try and separate, if you're doing personal work, right? Separate that out from doing your actual work in time and space, right? Again, make sure you don't finish doing your artwork and then just open up video game, right? Take a break. Make sure there's like separation between these things. Finish your work day, stop, close everything down. Do you know what I mean? Like, stretch, go outside, take a little break, do something again, drive around the block in your car, whatever it is, make some food. Just make sure there's a break there so that your brain is not associating those two things. That's the main thing. It's really simple. It's just your brain is very associates places with doing things. And the more you can kind of separate that out, almost literally, you could try doing a few of these things. One is, if you do have a very small room and you're sleeping in that room, right, and you're playing video games in that room, you could use a different chair to sit down when you're playing video games versus when you're working. If you're in a very small room, right, just putting a rug underneath your desk, so it's physically separated on the ground from your like bed or something like that, will help a lot. So these sort of little hacky things, right? Like try and make sure that you're separating out physically, spatially, mentally, those different tasks, right? And don't just sort of say, because you want to make sure that you don't kind of slip into one thing, right? You automatically sort of do one thing and then you're doing it here and you're doing it there. Whereas, one of the things that happens is like, if I can answer an email here, when I sit down here, I'm thinking about, I should answer that email. Whereas I never answer emails here, really, if I can help it. Unless it's a work email and I have to attach a file or something like that. But if it's just email or it's a bill or something like that, I never do it in this room. I always do it somewhere else. And that means in my brain, I'm like, oh, I'm in this room now. I do need to do that, but I can't. So I might as well just work. Those things take time to build, but you'd be surprised. Okay, like here's the key. You'd be surprised how big of an impact really small things have, right? Get up, have a shower, eat your breakfast, go for a walk, drive your car around the block, put on some clothes that are
please
somewhat respectable.
Please, everybody, right? Put on some clothes.
Put on some clothes that are respectable, right? Put on your shoes, do some work. When you're done, like, take a break, put on some different clothes, right? Like change your state in that instance. Little things like that will make a huge difference to you being able to sit down and feel like, oh, now I'm meant to do work. And you'd be surprised how quickly that stuff will take time. If we're going to be stuck here, what's your bet, Simon? How long do you reckon we're going to be doing this?
I don't know. I want to know.
Like a week ago, you said 2 weeks.
Did I? Was that what I said?
Do you reckon it's 2 weeks now? No.
I think it's going to be 4 to 6 months.
You reckon? Yeah, I don't know whether it's going to be that thing.
Hey? What's that?
I reckon it'll be less than that. I don't reckon it's going to last that long. But let's say it's a month.
Depends.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's say it's a month. And for us, I think like, look, it doesn't matter that much. You know what I mean? I think we're able to be pretty effective doing what we're doing now. Other things, I think probably they're going to need to make some other things sort of start again. But yeah, I'd say a month probably at least before everyone sort of calms down. Even if it did calm down, to get like, once you have the inertia of people not going, then, it's hard to kind of turn that on. But I'd say it's well worth starting to think about some of these things so that you can try and figure that out, right? In case it is 2 months, right? Or 3 months, or as you're saying, 6 months or something like that, right? Who knows what it's going to be. But don't worry about it like, being like, oh, it's got to work overnight. The other thing is, these are situations where you're learning a skill, you're building muscles, you're trying to reconfigure your pattern of behavior. It's probably going to take at least a month to like really, really get good at this anyway. So don't expect it to work overnight. And, it might come in handy, right? If this does take months, you're well worth spending a month to try and get effective at doing it, because I think a lot of people will go a bit nuts if this is a more than a month where this is happening. We're doing isolation. I think a lot of people are going to start to get really stir crazy. And if you're not being effective, or you're having some of these things that normally you kind of are normally doing, or you kind of slip, you really fall off the wagon. You start, going to bed at 5 a.m. and, or, you sort of wake up and stay up, and then you're like, oh, I've got a class at 9. I'll just stay up. It's really easy for people to get into bad habits when they don't have these kind of structures in place. So I think it's well worth just making sure we're all on a good path with it, so that, things at least go in a good direction. Right? It might be we're out of here in a couple of weeks, right? It could be a couple of months, but either way, I think it's good to start practicing some of those things, right? And that's just, make sure if you're stuck in a tiny little postage stamp bedroom, your family doesn't have a giant house, right? You don't have lots of outside room. Just make sure you try and optimize those things, right? Like literally, you will feel very differently about a room where your workspace is separated by carpet or different floor surface. It's just brains are like that, right? It's like you're trying to control the animal brain inside you, which is very instinctive, right? And is into those sort of territorial things, right? It's very easy to separate out space like that from an interior design perspective, get people to think like, oh, now I'm in a different space. If you've got open plans, super important to do that. Very, very important to do that. And I've done this. The reason that I say this is, like at the moment I have a whole room that's mine, right? Essentially for most of the day, but I've traveled overseas and worked on stuff with a laptop and nothing else, like multiple times. And, that's where you're changing your entire environment a lot. And having to kind of figure out how to do that. So I've had lots of experience doing this where I'm like, oh, now I'm in this place. I don't have my big studio. How do I work? How do I set up the laptop? How do I figure out how to do all this stuff? So and these are the things I found that work, right? It's not just me sitting in my high tower being like, I've been doing this for 20 years and here's all the weird nonsense that I do, that you'll never be able to happen. It's like, these are things that I've had to figure out because I'll be in a comfortable pattern working from home. And then, do you know what I mean? Like something happens in my life and all of a sudden I'm in a completely different house, right? Doing some other different thing. And I've had to be like, oh, wow, now I'm getting nothing done. No productivity. Why is that? That's weird. Like what happened? I was doing fine here. Now it's not working. What's the difference? Again, being like, oh, now I've got all my books and all my inspiration around. I've got my little chair I sit down on. I'm like going to my little hypnotic induction and go into flow. And then like, oh, now you're like essentially backpacking around Chile and you're in an apartment in Santiago and you've only got a laptop, no books, no inspiration, none of that stuff. What do? Completely different. So just figuring that out has taken me a lot of time. So I'm not just saying this from that perspective. Like I've been in some of those situations and there's little hacks and things that I feel like are really useful. But like literally get a different chair. Like if your desk is in your room, right? Make one chair, like if you got a comfy chair, like whatever the better chair is, make that your work chair. And when you're playing video games, get a chair from the dining room, right? And use that one. It'll change your state.
Make it a really uncomfortable chair so you play less games.
Yep. Yeah, or stand up, like that's, but like I swear little things like that will make a huge difference, right? And if you stack those little things, morning routine, doing different things, taking breaks, do you know what I mean? When work's over, like, go outside, again, like have a shower, right? Like move through many doors, go travel somewhere, right? Like eat some, like make some food, right? Take a break so that your brain gets to kind of say, now I was doing this, and then there's a break where I'm doing this other stuff, and then I'm going to sort of chill out, right? Do something different. It just builds that separation in your brain. Little things like that will make a huge difference. Because again, like I think as a creative person who I feel like you should be able to get a huge amount of creative fulfillment and life fulfillment out of this situation, right? You should be able to do a lot of really, really cool personal work, and you should be able to focus on your studies. And I'm like, this is probably like, it has the potential to be a positive thing for a lot of people in terms of productivity and the amount of work they're doing, because there's no distractions, right? The only distraction is a lot of things you can control. You don't have to think of like, I need a social life, otherwise I feel bad. It's like, no, you're not allowed a social life. You just have to sit at home all day. So cool. Think of some cool personal projects you want to do. Especially if we hit the holidays, if this does go for, what are we in week 4 now? Is this week 4 or week 5?
Week 4.
Yeah, week 4. Yeah. So in 2 weeks we go holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And so how much we like 6, so that means we're 10 weeks away from some mid-semester break, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
if we hit mid-semester break, right, and that's still like 2.5 months away, if we're still doing this, it would be really good to have some good practices in place so you can work on some personal projects and fill that time. And I think we're much better off as artists at having the potential to be really happy sitting at home. I think a lot of artists enjoy that, and are able to be very productive doing that. So I think there's a lot of people who, if you're if you like playing sport, it's like, sucks to be you.
Yeah, it does.
Because you can't
Thanks,
do. I mean, I like running, right? Which I can still do. I'm totally happy with this whole situation. But a lot of people don't have that opportunity. Like if you're doing a different type of job or you're studying something else, I don't think we're going to have that potential. But I think a lot of artists have the potential to be very happy, sitting at home making cool art. And so I think about how to do that. And the other thing I'd say is really make sure you do build in some personal art to your workflow, right? And your day, regardless of whether it's just playing video games. I think you should do some sketchbook work, really have this as an opportunity to get that going. And I'd make sure, you do that as a warm up, right? And things like posting to ArtStation and trying to get your work out there, we can still do that. Great opportunity to start that. Try build your Instagram followers. Try and get your ArtStation folio sorted. Try and organize those little bits and pieces, because I think you can still do all that, right? So just keep it in mind, right? Like I think we're all pretty well placed to do some cool things in that time, and especially if it keeps going, right? I think the more you can be effective during that time, the better. So yeah,
No, I think
about what cool project you want to do.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's I'm the same with you. Like, there's definitely it does have potential to kind of be like a positive thing for like creative people, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everyone's sitting there looking at their Instagram, right? They've got nothing else to do.
Yep. Yeah. So just kind of take advantage of that, use it as the positives that it presents, and and try and in the meantime I know some people are in kind of a crappy situation with, like just where you're living in this space you have and all that kind of stuff. But I guess just, try to make the most of it, try to set things up, try to just do a few little things that will help alleviate the situation as best as possible. I realize sometimes that's kind of impossible, but try and do the best you can, I think. But yeah, there's lots of I think we're about to wrap up, so there was lots of cool little tips, I think, Tim, for for these guys, what they can
probably
do.
Too many. I could have been more succinct with it.
No, I think it's good though. We've managed to get through 2 hours. So no, I think that's good. Does anyone have any like last little questions or anything that they want answered? I think I've been keeping a reasonably close eye on the chat, and I think we kind of answered most of the questions. There's always some really specific stuff, but I always wondered if a junior or entry-level artist is at a disadvantage working remotely. Would you learn better working face-to-face with a team? Of course, it doesn't apply right now because we have to work remote. I mean,
I'd say yes.
Yes, as in yes, it's better to work in a studio?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. Just when you're learning, I actually think that freelancing takes a lot of practice. Would you agree, Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of practice, a lot of dedication, a lot of like kind of, it's almost, you got to practice that almost as much as just drawing and painting, right? Just the process of being a freelance artist, let alone trying to get work and all that kind of stuff. It can be tricky. I think you definitely, especially if you're working in a good team. If you're working in a good team with good art directors and other people around you, you will instantly level up like crazy, right? I mean, we see this here at CDW all the time in our studio where we're working. Like, you know, quite every 6 months or so, I'm kind of bringing in someone new that works within the team, and you just see the improvement in their work when they're working with guys around here. The full-time staff and things, because I guess you see the level that people are at. You see. When you hear kind of people like, oh, yeah, I just normally get that done in like half a day or a day. And, you see it in the demo and it's sort of a slow process. But when you actually see people, oh, shit, they are actually doing that in 3 hours. You kind of go like, oh, right, hang on. I just need to lift my game here a bit. So, yeah, there's definitely that side of things. But, to be honest, getting any type of job is just amazing, right? Any type of meaningful art gig you can get is great. So if that just happens to be freelance, that's fine. If it's in studio, that's fine. Just and then in the meantime, you can look for whatever that particular opportunity is that you think suits you best, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of reasons why I think it's good. One is it gives you an insight into the industry in general, and no matter what type of industry, like whether you're talking VFX or games or animation, there is a lot of similarities between the way that those things work, that just getting any job where you can see that happen is going to be the easiest way to learn how all that works, right? Mm-hmm. I've had to learn remotely how a lot of that works, right? Yeah. I'm sort of, I talk to people, but I'm like super interested in that. Like, what's it like right now working in a studio? So that the people I'm talking to, I have some idea of what they're going to be dealing with. So I'm always like super interested. But yeah, I would say you're much better off if you can going somewhere, getting a job where you're actually doing something vaguely like that. Even if you're not the number one concept artist on a thing, if you just go and work at one of those studios somewhere, any studio, you're just going to learn a lot about the reality of it. Right? Like what it's actually like. And that's super valuable because you just have an idea. When you're imagining people are saying things, you kind of know like, yeah, that's right. I'm probably getting this feedback because the feedback's coming from a room full of people. And I've been in those rooms full of people. And that's why the feedback's like a little bit confused because like 5 people are giving it and some art directors like trying to type notes. And those notes are coming from like 5 people. If you're just a freelance artist and you're used to like going to school where it's like one person is writing an assignment and we're basically legally obliged to make the direction simple. And then you get feedback from like a real client where it's kind of like, yeah, we want 5 things that all conflict with each other. And you're just like, what's going on? You need to know like, this is messy. This is just a room full of people. This is just a building full of people trying to make this happen. None of it's perfect, and people make mistakes and sometimes it's not as clear as you want. And, like just that simple stuff, right? If you don't have that, you can start freelancing and then it's not about painting, right? It's not about doing that. It's about trying to decipher what you should be doing. That's a huge part of it. And if you haven't worked there, it's just so hard to figure out what's going to be going on and, just learning basic stuff that will help you once you do freelance. So I would recommend that, right, if you can. And it's just super easy. You kind of get on board with generally how things are working. You don't have to deal with any of the stuff that I'm talking about, right? It's just a huge uphill battle, right? And you'll also probably earn more money. If you do a basic studio job for like 3 years, it's going to be very hard to make a living as a freelancer straight off the bat. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, eventually you'll probably make more money
in the true sense of like freelancing. Yeah. I think these days as well, you can get like contracts and stuff as well. Like you might work remote for 3 months and you're kind of working, on like contract and stuff, and that stuff's really cool as well. That can be good. But yeah, in the true sense of like freelancing, where you're generating your own clients, and that's tricky.
Yep. Yeah, and you make contacts and people if you work there. Like again, it's like that just happens. It'll happen. Like all those things just happen by themselves if you just do one thing, which is like get a job somewhere.
Yeah.
If you freelance, it's just as easy. It's just as hard. It's just that you need to manifest all of those things yourself. You need to manifest the networking. You need to manifest the discipline. You need to manifest working from home. You need to manifest understanding what these other people are thinking when they're in the studio, right? If you just go work somewhere, it's easy. All that stuff happens for you. It's just on a platter. Like, here you go. Here's all the information. And, no one's expecting you to be super productive because they're kind of investing their time in you, and they're like, yeah, they'll probably give you 6 months to kind of really become productive. Whereas when you freelance, like, people are kind of expecting you to earn your keep, right? You don't get as much grace period. You don't get that sort of time, so I think it's a lot more relaxing to kind of do it. I think if you got a studio, but that's saying I didn't, you know what I mean? I had like very short studio time, but I still learned a lot of things, you know? Yeah. So I'd say definitely, it's your life will be easier if you are not working remotely to begin with. But again, depending on scenario, that might not be possible. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and sort of a question statement about just networking and communicating with people and stuff. And I think that's important all the time. Just keeping up that kind of communication with people, and having friends, family, all that kind of stuff is obviously pretty important.
Yeah. Well, I think again, like, just going to work and talking to people and going to school, like, and talking to people takes care of so many mental health potential problems. You just feel connected to people, feel like we're part of a community. That's a good example. Like, now that's not going to happen by itself. You need to make it happen. Do you know what I mean? You need to organize Skype catch-ups with your friends. You know what I mean? We need to kind of make that stuff happen. Whereas that sort of stuff just normally happens. Now you have to manifest all of those social community things, breaks, because otherwise it's just you sitting in a room for the next, 1 to 6 months, which is terrifying, but, the one thing I'd sort of say is like, when I'm a freelancer, most of my friends are freelancers, and I would get out of the house every day, like every single day. When I'm freelancing, like, full on, I'm like, yeah, this is boring. I need to get out of the house. And like, now I have a young family, right? So we do lots of social things that I don't have to organize with a family. But when I was like single and, I was freelancing and I was like busy, like every single day I would organize a lunch date with someone every single day. And I had like, I have like 10 friends who are freelancing. So it's like every day. And that's what I remember doing that with you, Simon. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
We just all the time, we'd be like, oh, let's grab lunch on whatever. And you're a freelancer, like you need to do that, right? To network and do that. It's not going to happen by itself. And that's just what we do. Everyone's like, oh yeah, let's just catch up once a week, or once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And you just talk about freelancing and, and yeah. The other thing I noticed about people who freelance or work from home is like, you always kind of have the work you're doing, and then you have whatever weird obsession you're into at the moment, right? And I've got a lot of friends who do that, and it's kind of like, yeah, I'm doing work, and also I'm trying to learn how to make sourdough bread. And it's like, oh, and so I've been looking on YouTube and I've been buying this like culture, and like, yeah, you've got to like cook it in a particular way and blah, blah, blah. And I've like tried, and it's kind of, I just think there's a natural thing where you kind of are often just home, and it's really good to have something that you're working towards, right? Some like weird thing, it's like people are always like interested in some side gig, right? Some little side obsession. It's like working out, lifting weights, like making some food, or something super basic. But I always notice that, and I'd be like, yeah, all these people are like, they're always doing something else weird, something else really, trying to become an expert in some little thing, or just learn about something, because I think that makes you feel like you're growing, right? And you've always got something else that are interested going on, but that's weird. I'd always notice that, we just talk about that, catch up with people, and it's like, oh, how's freelance going? You kind of complain about all your clients a little bit, and think about these sort of productivity things, and then like, oh, here's a book I read, and you're really thinking about it. And I get that feeling more from people who are freelance than people who are not freelance. It's a lot easier for me to catch up with them, and I'd listen to their like sourdough bread story, and I'd be like, that's really interesting. Maybe you should try this or try that, or like, it just because I think that's part of it, right? Sort of being interested in stuff, and having a lot of time where you're stuck at home. and so you don't go stir crazy, basically. Especially if you're stuck there. Like often I think freelancers are doing that. Someone's making their own video game. Yeah, like you might go 6 months where you're just bug fixing. I mean, you go nuts. You go absolutely insane. You will go bonkers, raving mad if you do not have friends to talk to every day, and you don't have some other little thing that's kind of giving you the creative outlet that you can't get. Do you know what I mean? From your job or from whatever. And I think that stuff's super important. Don't just think that freelancers are sitting there getting up and being like, oh, right, gonna get to work. It's like, nah, it's all this weird stuff that happens just naturally once you kind of get that under control. Yeah, you're just kind of Googling and like, oh, that looks cool. I'm going to try doing that. Yeah. And you can, because you've got the time and yeah. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to see, how much people potentially get, into some of those things, but definitely, there is like a Discord chat and stuff like that people use for CDW.
There is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's like just a student one. I don't know the details. I'm too old for Discord.
No. But like make sure.
But you reach out and do those things.
You will go crazy if you don't talk to other humans, and don't expect anything else different to happen. Try and work on personal projects. Try do some sketching. Try post it, get it out there. Do you know what I mean? Show it to other people. Post it in the Discord. Do you know what I mean? Like, try get that stuff happening. That's what I did when I was learning from home. This is the other thing is like, you and me, Simon, probably did this thing where we learned from home.
Yep.
How to do a lot of this art, and that's the kind of stuff you do. I mean, that's the thing that keeps you sane. I'm sitting there working on this thing. Like, doesn't matter if no one sees it.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, work on this thing, post it on a forum, like post and like, oh, what are people going to say? Like, oh, I got one thing. Oh, someone posted on my thing. Like, you go and check it and you like read it. That was the exciting bit of it, doing a painting, doing a thing, putting it out there, see how many likes did you get? It's really self-serving, but that's kind of what we did, you need that feedback. You need that somehow, and luckily we're really set up for that right now. So do it.
Yeah. All right, guys.
That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap up this stream. We'll definitely post it up on YouTube and stuff. So it's, can kind of, people can watch it back, whatever. And if you have any questions, please, don't hesitate to contact us, and happy to answer any questions that you have. So, thanks.
If you want this to be more specific, like I'm having trouble with this particular part of, the productivity or something, like, send Simon an email. Do you know what I mean? And, really get stuck into it, and maybe we can do it again and, get a little bit more stuck in, because so far, I've just been rambling and saying random things that I think might be interesting, but it's a big topic.
Yeah, anything specific, let us know, and we'd love to talk about that stuff more. So so thanks for tuning in, and
cool.
We'll see you guys next time.
See you around.
Okay. Press stop.